This is the Ben Shapiro Show. Today's show is sponsored by ExpressVPN. Protect your data from big tech with the VPN I trust. Visit expressvpn.com/Ben. Well, Joe Biden did a big press conference yesterday. And here's the thing. The media really were not going to ask him about a few issues that were kind of uncomfortable for Joe Biden. Among those issues, why aren't you just reopening schools at this point? Not a single question was asked in this press conference about Joe Biden's COVID policy. Not one, which is kind of amazing. Remember, it's the most important issue ever. When we shut down the entire economy of the United States for a year. Remember, we're spending more money than has ever been spent in the history of humanity. That is not an exaggeration. We are now spending more money than any government has ever spent ever. Ever. Okay, we are doing so on the back of a pandemic that is already on the wane. He was not asked a single question about that, and he was not asked a single question about, for example, school reopenings. He read some talking points about school reopenings where he talked about maybe we'll have to reopen some schools, and that'll be great. By the way, if you actually look at a chart of the states that have reopened their schools versus the states that have not, it is a complete blue-red divide. The vast majority of blue states have kept kids out of school. The vast majority of red states have not. And then you're going to tell me it's all about the science? Okay, Biden's own people right now are not committing to reopening schools in the fall. Here is Biden's education secretary yesterday saying that they're not sure if the schools are going to reopen in the fall. How is he not asked about this?
You know, it's premature to tell. One thing that I know as a former commissioner of education, COVID-19 numbers will dictate how we move to reopen schools. So it's not just about what's happening in the schools. It's about what's happening in the community. If as members of our community, we can follow those mitigation strategies to make sure that our schools are safe places for our students and for our staff, we should have students in school next year. We should have them in school in the spring.
Remember when this was the party of science? Yeah, not the party of science so much. Yes, the schools should be open now. They should have been open months ago. My kids have been in school the entire year. It is a travesty, particularly targeting minority students, that the schools have not been open. And you still have members of this administration. It's too soon to tell whether we're going to open in the fall? This is nuts. This is an amazing story from U.S. News and World Report. Lauren Camera writing, quote, the president of the country's most politically powerful teachers union called into question the Center for Disease Control and Prevention's decision last week to revise from 6 feet to 3 feet its social distancing guideline in schools, arguing the science backing the decision doesn't take into account the unique challenges most urban school districts face. Okay, so the CDC came out in the last couple of weeks, and they announced that kids don't need to be 6 feet apart in schools. They probably only need to be 3 feet apart in schools. By the way, the 6 feet standard came from absolutely nowhere. If you are somebody who's like a deep believer in 6 feet, 6 feet, 6 feet, there was like no scientific basis to 6 feet. If somebody sneezes, it goes like 15 feet. And if you're not sneezing, it doesn't go 6 feet. It goes like 2 feet. Okay, but the media kept, if you don't stay 6 feet away from that guy next to you, it's because you're, and the schools, man, we got to keep these kids at least 6 feet apart. Then the CDC comes along and they're like, oh yeah, by the way, totally wrong about that. We could have halved the size of the school classrooms and been fine. Kids can be 3 feet apart. And the teachers unions, because they're running the agenda and they don't want to go back to school ever. They just want to get paid for staying home and zooming in. They say they're not going to listen to the CDC. Are we seeing headlines today about how the teachers unions are anti-science? About how the scientific agenda is being thwarted by the teachers unions? Oh yeah, I didn't think so. The American Federation of Teachers President Randy Weingarten, one of the worst people in America, wrote Tuesday in a letter to CDC Director Rochelle Walensky and Education Secretary Miguel Cardona, quote, although I was very worried about the implications of the shift, I reviewed judgment until we could review the new studies that were presented. We have done that this weekend. We appreciate that the body of knowledge regarding the impact of COVID-19 in school environments is expanding, but we're not convinced the evidence supports changing physical distancing requirements at this time. Our concern is that the cited studies do not identify the baseline mitigation strategies needed to support 3 feet of physical distancing. Moreover, they were not conducted in our nation's highest density and least resourced schools, which have poor ventilation, crowding, and other structural challenges. Okay, my favorite part of that is when Randy Weingarten is like, we haven't tried this in the schools, so we don't know if it works. Right, because the schools are closed. The question is under what circumstances you are going to reopen the schools. You want to talk about anti-scientific? It's like, okay, so here's our theory. We tried this theory, it didn't work. So our new theory is that we don't need to do that. They're like, well, you haven't tested that theory, so probably we'll go back to the first theory. What in the world are you talking about? That's not how science works. Once you've debunked a hypothesis, you don't go back to that hypothesis 5 seconds later based on the fact you haven't tried another hypothesis. It's ridiculous. By the way, schools have been open all over the world. They've been open in Asia. They've been open in Israel. They've been open in, particularly for elementary students. They've been open in Europe. They've been open in vast swaths of the United States. But don't worry, the teachers' unions are all about the science. They're all about the science. Joe Biden was not asked a single question about any of that. He was not, no questions about that. Meanwhile, other things he was not asked questions about. It's an unbelievable story from Politico. Okay, reported by Tara Palmieri and Ben Schreckinger. Okay, in Politico. On October 23rd, 2018, President Joe Biden's son Hunter and daughter-in-law Hallie were involved in a bizarre incident in which Hallie took Hunter's gun and threw it in a trash can behind a grocery store, only to return later to find it gone. Delaware police began investigating, concerned that the trash can was across from a high school and that the missing gun could be used in a crime, according to law enforcement officials and a copy of the police report obtained by Politico. But a curious thing happened at the time. Secret Service agents approached the owner of the store where Hunter, a derelict, bought the gun and asked to take the paperwork involving the sale, according to two people, one of whom has firsthand knowledge of the episode and the other was briefed by a Secret Service agent after the fact. The gun store owner refused to supply the paperwork, suspecting, correctly, that the Secret Service officers wanted to hide Hunter's ownership of the missing gun in case it were to be involved in a crime, the two people said. The owner, Ron Palmieri, later turned over the papers to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, which oversees federal gun laws. The Secret Service says it has no record of its agents investigating the incident. Joe Biden, who's not under protection at the time, said through a spokesperson he has no knowledge of any Secret Service involvement. Days later, the gun was returned by an older man who regularly rummages through the grocery store's trash to collect recyclables, according to people familiar with the situation. The incident did not result in charges or arrests. Okay, so just to get this straight, what happened, apparently, is that Hunter, he was dating his brother's widow, I think is the story here, and she, for some odd reason, took his gun and threw it in the garbage bin behind a store, which was across from a high school. And the Secret Service then went and tried to clean it up. And there will be no charges resulting. These are the same people who are like, we need strict gun laws, guys. Gun laws. We need them. We need strict gun laws so that people who mishandle weapons get prosecuted. Unless your name is Hunter Biden, apparently. The gun store incident occurred during a period after Hunter Biden's administrative discharge from the Naval Reserves for his positive cocaine test and his subsequent divorce from his first wife, Kathleen. At the time of the gun incident, Hunter was in a romantic relationship with Hallie, the widow of his late brother, Beau. Apparently, he illegally obtained a gun. He bought the gun October 12th, 2018. He responded no to a question on the transaction record that asked, quote, are you an unlawful user of or addicted to marijuana or any depressant, stimulant, narcotic drug, or any other controlled substance? 5 years earlier, he'd been discharged from the Navy Reserve after testing positive for coke. He and family members have spoken about his history of drug use. Lying on the form is a felony, though prosecutions are extremely rare. So it sounds like he bought the gun illegally. That's what it sounds like, because there's fairly good contemporaneous evidence that Hunter was not off the sauce. We'll get to more on this in just 1 second. First, you never thought that COVID could cost you your home, right? Well, it might, because cybercrime is up 75% during COVID. By far the most serious cybercrime to consider, home title theft. That's right. Cybercriminals, foreign and domestic, that are now after your home title. It's easier than you would think. They can't actually steal your house, but the value of your home is in the home title. The title documents to your home is online. So the thief finds that home title document, then forges your signature on a quitclaim deed saying you sold your home to him, then proceeds to take out loans on your home, leaving you in debt. You're not going to know until late payments or eviction notices arrive. Insurance does not cover you, neither do common identity theft programs. That's why I protect my home with Home Title Lock. The instant Home Title Lock detects someone tampering with my home title, they help shut it down absolutely cold. Head on over to HomeTitleLock.com right now. Register your address to see if you're already a victim, and then just use code RADIO to receive 30 free days of protection. That is code RADIO at HomeTitleLock.com. Once more, HomeTitleLock.com. Again, your most valuable asset. It ain't the jewelry. It ain't the cash in your house. It is the actual house title. Make sure that it is locked up at HomeTitleLock.com. Use promo code RADIO for 30 free days of protection. And then he was dating his brother's widow, and apparently the incident began when Hallie searched Hunter's pickup, which was parked at her home in Wilmington, because of unspecified suspicions she had, according to a Delaware State Police report. Inside the truck, she found a .38 revolver. Hallie took the gun to Jansen's Market, a nearby high-end grocery store where the Bidens are longtime regular customers. There, she tossed the gun wrapped in a black shopping bag into a trash bin outside of the store, which, by the way, is not the way that you get rid of guns. Just note to the wise, if you have a functional weapon, you know what you don't do to get rid of it? Just toss it in the garbage can, you morons. Later that day, Hallie informed Hunter of what she had done. He instructed her to retrieve the gun, according to the police report. When Hallie returned, she found the gun was missing and reported the issue to the store. Police received calls from the store's general manager, Paula Jansen, and from another person, according to the report. The missing gun caused heightened concern, according to the police report, because the grocery sits across from the Alex DuPont High School. Arriving on the scene, Delaware Stadies retrieved security camera footage from the store, interviewed Jansen, the store manager. Quote, we complied with the police, gave them whatever security footage we could, Jansen told Politico. The FBI also responded. At the time, the FBI was already monitoring Hunter as part of an investigation that remains ongoing and currently focuses on his taxes. No comment from the FBI. In addition to questioning Hallie, police called Hunter to the scene. He was questioned outside the store's loading dock area and explained he used the gun for target practice. At one point, two of Jansen's employees, described by the police report as Mexican males, walked past the loading dock area, and Hunter told a police officer the store had some suspicious people working for it. Asked if he was referring to those two staffers, Hunter responded, yeah, probably illegal, according to the report. So he's a racist also. He's a drug-addled, gun-toting racist who illegally obtained his weapon. No problems here, guys. Everything is totally fine. The story has all the things, all of them. Two Mexican workers walk past. He's like, oh, those are probably illegal. Based on what? The fact that they're of Mexican extraction? And based on the fact that you're apparently a criminal? When a police officer asked Hunter whether the gun had been used in a crime, the officer reported Hunter, quote, became very agitated with me and asked if I was intentionally trying to make him mad. When the officer asked Hunter whether he had been doing drugs or drinking heavily, he said, listen, it isn't like that. I think she believes I was going to kill myself, according to the report. An officer asked Hunter whether he had called his dad. Hunter said, I've never called my dad for anything, according to the police report, which we know is a lie. After being questioned, Hunter retrieved the case for the gun, which included the gun serial number from Hallie's house, returned to the grocery store and handed it over to the cops. When police questioned Hunter and Hallie, two Secret Service agents arrived. They went to the store where Hunter purchased the gun. The agents showed their badges and ID cards to Palmieri, the store's owner, and asked to take possession of the firearms transaction record Hunter had filled out. She said no. The Palmieri said, no, I'm not going to do that. The Secret Service left without the records, and Palmieri handed over the transaction record to the ATF. The ATF spokesperson referred questions to the Delaware Stateys. Jason Hatchell, spokesperson for Delaware State Police, said any freedom of information, any questions about the incident would have to be filed through a FOIA request. The Delaware State Police already rejected Politico's FOIA request for records related to the incident last November. It's amazing. Okay, there's been no major media coverage of this, because that's what the establishment media will never cover, is the fact that Hunter Biden is a derelict, and his dad knew about it for years, and apparently facilitated the dereliction in a wide variety of cases, including Hunter rushing about the globe, picking up bags of cash in different places. A White House spokesperson said Biden was not aware of any Secret Service involvement in the episode. Just change the name Biden to Trump and imagine the size of the scandal. But don't worry, Biden is a good guy. He's a nice guy, so we don't cover what happened with Hunter. By the way, speaking of hypocrisy, authoritarianism, by the way, relies on hypocrisy. The Cuomo family also apparently has engaged in an enormous amount of hypocrisy. It turns out, according to the New York Times, Governor Andrew Cuomo's administration arranged special access to government-run coronavirus testing for members of his family and other influential people as the pandemic descended on New York last year. The move to make testing of people closely tied to Cuomo a priority was carried out by high-ranking state health officials, according to one of the people. It happened in March 2020. Testing was still not widely available, but Andrew made sure that his family members had it. Just like our brand new Deputy Secretary of Health and Human Services, Dr. Rachel Levine, ensured that Dr. Levine's mom was not in a nursing home when all the COVID-positive patients were being shipped back into the nursing homes. Weird how this seems to keep happening with Democrats, how the rules don't apply to them. Alrighty, we'll get to more of this in just 1 second. First, there are a lot of sort of chronic medical issues that people just let simmer. They think, okay, it'll go away. And the more embarrassing the issue, the more people tend to put it on the back burner. Well, that stuff can really affect your life. And if you're talking about erectile dysfunction, that's something that can be solved quickly and discreetly and easily by my friends over at Roman. With Roman, you can get a free online evaluation and ongoing care for ED, all from the comfort and privacy of your home. A U.S. licensed healthcare professional will work with you to find the best treatment plan. If medication is appropriate, it ships to you free with 2-day shipping. The whole process is straightforward and discreet. Getting started, super simple. Just go to GetRoman.com/Ben. Complete an online visit. Take care of your ED without leaving your home. Complete an online visit today to connect with a healthcare professional and take care of it. Go to GetRoman.com/Ben now. You'll get $15 off your very first month. It's really time to take care of that ED. No reason to just sit around and wait for a bad thing to go away. It ain't going to happen. Go get it taken care of right now. Go to GetRoman.com/Ben. Remember, get started today. You'll save $15 on your first order of ED treatment. Go to GetRoman.com/Ben and save $15 off your first month. The gun control left has no worries about Hunter Biden, a drug-addicted derelict, leaving his gun out and then having it thrown in a garbage can behind a high school and lying apparently on his forms about obtaining the gun in the first place. That's totally fine. But you, law-abiding citizen, you need to lose your gun. You can't get a test in New York in March 2020, but you know who can. If your last name is Cuomo, you can get a test. And then you can go on national TV and you can hang out with your bro and talk about the size of your nostrils and did mom love you best? Yes, we need to give more power and control to these folks. More power and control. Top down. They're going to fix everything, and they care about you. They don't care about their own. They care about you. They're just caring and nice and wonderful. Amazing, amazing stuff. Alrighty, coming up. Joe Biden isn't just addled. He says overtly crazy things. He is now pushing this lie that women are, on average, paid less for the same work. It's not been true for years and years in the United States. He's pushing it anyway. And he's saying the dumbest possible things and pushing that. My goodness. This is the Ben Shapiro Show. Welcome back. This is the Ben Shapiro Show. So, when Joe Biden is not incoherently babbling about illegal immigration, he's incoherently babbling about the supposed pay gap. Now, the pay gap is one of the most overwrought, ridiculous things in American public life. The notion that women are being paid less for the same exact work is not backed by statistical evidence. The reality is that the pay gap is almost entirely a creation of differentials in work hours, in jobs chosen. It is a differential in time taken off from the workforce. Women tend to take more time out of the workforce because they want to be home with the kids in many cases. The basic idea that a woman works an hour, a man works an hour, exact same job, exact same credentials, and so the woman gets paid less is just silly. It actually is not true. It's been widely debunked. Christina Hoff Sommers has done that work many, many times before. In fact, in America's largest cities, it's been true for years that people who are fresh out of college without having taken time out of the workforce, women in the same industries tend to be paid as highly or more than men. That's according to Time magazine. That goes back a full decade. Doesn't matter. We're still going to keep promoting the quote-unquote equity-based idea that if women on average are paid less than men, for all of those extraneous factors, for all of those confounds, well, that's still not good enough. We have to equalize pay between men and women and pretend that women are not getting paid enough for the same exact work as a man. So Biden's administration earlier this week trotted out Megan Rapinoe, who's the least victimized victim in American public life. Megan Rapinoe is an extraordinarily famous gay woman who has not, so far as I'm aware, been victimized in any of her media coverage. She grew up extremely privileged. She did not grow up impoverished. She has faced, from what I can see, very little in the way of actual life obstacles to success. She is now treated as a paragon of feminist virtue, even though the claims that she makes are overtly false, repeatedly, like this one. Here was Megan Rapinoe complaining she's not paid the same as the men. Yeah, you're not paid the same as the men, lady, because you're in women's soccer, which makes money once every 4 years, whereas men's soccer makes money pretty much all the time. And the Men's World Cup is a multiple, like a large multiple bigger than the Women's World Cup. And you guys signed a contract. So if you don't like your contract, you could have not signed that contract. But here's Megan Rapinoe complaining that she does the same work as a man and doesn't get paid the same as a man.
4 World Cup championships and 4 Olympic gold medals for the United States. And despite those wins, I've been devalued, I've been disrespected, and dismissed because I am a woman. And I've been told that I don't deserve any more than less because I am a woman. You see, despite all the wins, I'm still paid less than men who do the same job that I do.
They don't do the same job that you do. They don't. You know how I know? Because Megan Rapinoe, anytime you want, you can go play on the men's team. You can try. You can try. After all, gender is it's a social construct. We have been informed by the left that gender does not exist. It's completely a social construct. So since gender is a social construct, anytime Megan Rapinoe wants, she can go try and play with the men. That is not going to go great for Megan Rapinoe. She is not doing the same work that a man is doing. This is like saying that a woman lifting weights, like her job is to lift weights, she's doing exactly the same job as a man when she wins a gold medal in a weightlifting competition. Well, not really, considering the man is probably lifting twice as much weight as the woman. I mean, not to put too fine a point on this, but in a scrimmage, the Women's World Cup soccer team, the gold medal winning Women's World Cup soccer team, lost to the under 15 football club from Dallas. Boys football club from Dallas, the under 15s. Bunch of 14-year-old, like, yes, it was a scrimmage, but also, like, you lost to a bunch of 14-year-old boys. No, it's not. No, actually, you're not doing the same work as the men. This is all absurd. Okay, it's just absurd. And her proclaiming, she's speaking from the podium of the damned White House. She's been on every major television show complaining about her fate. She signed voluntarily a contract as to her pay, and the Women's World Cup, again, is a fraction the size of the Men's World Cup. It's amazing. But don't worry, Joe Biden assures us that there's not a single thing a man can do a woman can't do better. Not a single thing. Men can't pee their name in the snow better. Men can't open pickle jars better. Men can't pick up heavy weights better. Men can't throw a baseball harder on average. No, it turns out every single thing a man can do, a woman can do just as well or better, which is why he should probably resign and let Kamala Harris be president.
I've told my daughters, granddaughters, from the time they were old enough to understand what I was saying, and I mean it, there's not a single thing a man can do that a woman can't do as well or better. Not a single thing.
Not a single thing? Anything? Really? There are things that women can do better than men. There are things men can do better than women. But frankly, I'm shocked that he still thinks the distinction exists. He can't even define what a woman is. It turns out that many men are better at being women than women, according to Joe Biden. Alrighty, coming up, speaking of anti-science, a lot of folks claiming that if you don't buy into the left solutions on climate change, you're anti-science. We'll speak with Bjørn Lomborg about it. This is the Ben Shapiro Show. Welcome back. This is the Ben Shapiro Show. Joining us on the line is Bjørn Lomborg. He's president of the Copenhagen Consensus, visiting fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. His latest book is False Alarm: How Climate Change Panic Costs Us Trillions, Hurts the Poor, and Fails to Fix the Planet. Bjørn, thanks so much for joining the show. Really appreciate it.
Hey, it's great to be here.
So let's talk about the Biden administration. They're pushing forward the idea that climate change, of course, is an existential threat to humanity. They talk about it being the greatest threat to Americans over the course of the next century. Is there any truth to the idea that this is one of the gravest threats facing America? Because that seems to me, based on the data that I've seen from you and from others, that is at best a wildly exaggerated point of view.
Yes, it is wildly exaggerated. Look, global warming is a real problem, and it will have a mostly negative impact over the next 100 years. So the UN estimate that in 50 years from now, the impact will be equivalent to each one of us losing somewhere between 0.2 and 2% of our income. Remember, by then we'll be 362% as rich as we are today, according to the UN's own estimates. So instead of being 362% richer, we'll only be 356% richer. Yes, that's a problem. No, it's not an existential crisis.
And it is those trade-offs that seem to be forgotten in all of the political calculus around all of this stuff. Because if you want to make sure that we are not, in fact, 356% richer by 2050, what you do is you put in place policies right now that actually lower the trajectory of the growth curve. Because if you start losing not 2% off your income in 2050, but you start losing 2% a year in the growth curve every single year up to 2050, then that starts to look an awful lot like a pretty negative impact on most people living in the country.
Absolutely. So it's very clear we need to make sure we don't end up spending so much money and reducing our growth rate and reducing our economy so much that we actually end up worse off than if we had not tried to fix the problem. Now, it's important to say both sides tend to exaggerate. So just like Biden will tell you it's an existential crisis, a lot of people will tell you if we do something about global warming, it'll be the end of the economy. It's neither, because the economy is actually really robust. But it's a question of saying, are we going to have a little bit of problem with climate problems by the 2070s, or are we possibly going to cost a lot more in the development of opportunity and welfare for the world's future in 50 years. And remember, this is especially important for the world's poor. We tend to say this is mostly a problem for the world's poor. The world's rich are going to be fine with global warming because we have the resources to be able to protect ourselves. But the amazing thing is that you're then saying, well, let's try and help the world's poor by cutting their main way of getting rich, which is getting access to a lot of cheap and reliable energy. This is what's brought everybody out of poverty, certainly the US and Denmark and everybody else, but also China over the last 50 years, lots and lots of power. And obviously, a lot of developing countries want to go the same way.
I mean, it is pretty incredible how you will hear people in the United States and in Europe talk about environmental impact in the sense that by 2050, 2060, people might have to move inland from some of the coast, and that's going to be a serious problem, which it will be. But at the same time, people are literally burning dung in order to stay alive in many areas on planet Earth. And you never hear about that. The idea is that gas is the gas, natural gas, coal. These are the worst things to ever happen to humanity, when in reality, they're some of the best things to ever happen to humanity. We can hope that we will move beyond them at some point, but the data right now are not showing that, particularly for the billions of people who are living in poverty, that is an option, that they can just build solar panels on corrugated iron shacks.
Exactly. So, Ben, about almost 3 billion people cook and keep warm with dirty fuels like you were mentioning, dung, cardboard, whatever they can get their hands on, and of course wood, which leads to deforestation. That's the equivalent of each of these almost 3 billion people smoking 2 packs of cigarettes every day because it's so polluted indoors. They would love to get access to clean and modern energy. Also, you mentioned that sea levels are going to rise, so you'll have to move inland. Well, yes, sea levels are going to rise, but we know how to fix that. I mean, Holland is obviously an excellent example of that. And if you look at what other predictions, well, if you just look at sea levels rising about 1 meter and we do nothing, they estimate that you will have to relocate 187 million people. That's a lot of people by the end of the century. But if you assume that people are actually going to do what they've done up till now, which is spend a tiny fraction of their income to protect themselves and their loved ones better and better as they get richer, it is not going to be 187 million people. It's going to be 305,000 people. That's half the number of people that move out of California every year. So it gives you a sense of globally, no, this is not a problem. It's not a catastrophe. It is a problem. It is something we need to fix, but we need to get a sense of proportion.
We're speaking with Bjørn Lomborg. His new book is False Alarm: How Climate Change Panic Costs Us Trillions, Hurts the Poor, and Fails to Fix the Planet. It's your focus on mitigation that I think, or adaptation rather, that people seem to just completely ignore. They want to focus in on mitigation because, frankly, it seems like there's another agenda, which is to redistribute global income, and it has very little to do with actually, effectuating solutions. Adaptation has always been what humans are best at. It turns out that we are kind of not great at mitigation, but we are fantastic at adaptation, which is why there are now billions of us on planet Earth.
We're definitely very good at adaptation. We're also very good at another thing that I think we're sort of missing in this conversation. That's innovation. That's the Bill Gates point to fixing climate change. Look, you're never going to fix any problem on planet Earth by telling people, I'm sorry, could you be much worse off? Could you do stuff that you don't really want to do? That's just very, very hard to do. But if you could innovate the price of green energy down below fossil fuels, everyone would switch, not just rich, well-meaning Americans a little bit, but also Chinese, Indians, Africans, because we would have innovated the price of green energy down below fossil fuels. Take a look at Los Angeles back in the 1950s, terribly polluted, mostly because of cars. The solution was not to tell people, I'm sorry, could you walk or run instead? That would never work. What was the solution was the catalytic converter. You plug it on, it costs a little bit, yes, but then you can drive much more and pollute much less. That's what fixed most of the air pollution problem in Los Angeles.
So one of the things that has happened is that social media have started to crack down on people like you. They've started to crack down on pretty much anybody who does not simply parrot the solution line that is promoted by the radical environmental left. I felt this myself. I've openly said that I'm not arguing with the IPCC estimates on global warming and on climate change, even though I will say that the range that they predict by the end of the century is pretty wild. I mean, it is fairly amazing that we are supposed to believe that they have exact specific knowledge when the range of possibilities is something like between 2 degrees Celsius and 6 degrees Celsius. Like that's kind of a large range in terms of your estimates. But that's fine. I mean, I'm willing to endorse that range because these people know more than I do about exactly how the climate is going to change over the coming century. What I'm not willing to endorse is these world-breaking sort of proposals today to completely destroy, the ability of people to get ahead, particularly in poorer countries, in the name of environmental mitigation. And yet, if you say, I just have different solutions, right? I want to innovate. I want to look at the possibility of building seawalls. I want to look at the possibility of using devices to geoengineering to actually change the climate. We need to look in major cities at the possibility of, for example, whitening the roads so that we are absorbing less of the sunlight. If you do those things, That's still not good enough. They will label you a climate denier, even if you're not actually denying any of the science with regard to climate change.
Yeah, you're simply challenging the climate policies. And the reality, of course, is we need to have that conversation. Obviously, one of the best ways to get people to spend hundreds of trillions of dollars we don't have and that we need urgently elsewhere is to scare them witless. And I think that's one of the reasons why there is such a sense in trying to, rigorously keep all of the conversation in climate change on this very alarming path. My argument would be to say that's very unlikely to lead to good outcomes. When you're panicked, when you're scared, you're unlikely to make good decisions. Now, look, if global warming really was this terrible and scary thing, obviously we should be telling people so. But I think, when you actually look at the data, when you look, for instance, at how many people die from climate-related disasters, so storm, flood, droughts, floods and extreme temperatures, we know we have good data back from the last century, from 1920 till today, and the number has declined by 96%. It used to be about 500,000 people dying every year. Now it's about less than 20,000 people. And remember, we've quadrupled the number of people on the planet. Why is that? It's because we're much richer and hence we're much more resilient. But we never hear that. We only hear the next catastrophe because of the CNN factor. That there's always a camera pointed to the next catastrophe, and it makes for good news. But it doesn't make for good information. That's why we need to understand, look, there is a problem. It's not the end of the world. Actually, if anything, we know that we're better and better able to handle this. We need all that information in order to not end up spending more money on trying to fix a problem than the problem itself costs.
Bjorn, it seems like we are being deliberately misled by the media in so many of these cases. I remember being at a sort of hoity-toity event in the recent past, and there were a bunch of climate change experts there, including scientists from Caltech and MIT talking about their climate modeling, and they were saying exactly the same kind of stuff that you're saying or that I'm saying. And I remember being stunned. I was sitting there thinking to myself, this is crazy, because if they walk out that front door and they say the exact same thing publicly, then they will be ripped as crazed right-wingers. Right? If you have the temerity to cite William Nordhaus, who just won the Nobel Prize in economics for his work on climate change, to the effect that the world can actually withstand fairly well 1.5 degrees Celsius of climate change, and actually you'd be spending more to prevent that than the amount of damage that would be done in achieving 1.5 degrees Celsius climate change. If you even cite that, people get angry. The guy just won the Nobel Prize. Instead, the media have decided not to trot out people who actually know anything. Instead, they trot out child activists who go around screaming at adults that the adults need to listen to them. And, everybody's entitled to their opinion. I just don't understand why exactly it is that people who actually know something about climate change are never on TV, but people who scream at adults about how they're wrecking the world are constantly on TV. That's not the fault of the child. It's the fault of the adults who are putting the kids on TV.
I mean, look, you're preaching to the choir. I think fundamentally the problem here is that it sells much, much more to tell you here's another disaster. And so we hear one disaster after another. Remember, last year we were told that the hurricane season was record-breaking. Yes, it was record-breaking in the Atlantic Ocean because we have satellites, so we can see a lot of hurricanes form that never make it to shore. But if you actually look across the century, it was only the 20th biggest in the Atlantic. And if you look at the globe, it was actually one of the weakest in the satellite area over the last 40 years. Why is it there's such a big discrepancy? Because who would want to turn on a TV channel that tells you, look, it's a little bit the same. It's probably a little less than what it was yesterday. Or last year. It's no fun. So I think there is a terrible tendency for us to constantly hear bad things are happening. And I think in some ways what we need to do is to say, well, we also need the statistics telling you, yes, it's a little boring, but actually telling you, look, fundamentally, things are going better, not worse. Doesn't mean that there's no problem, but let's start being smart about it. And of course, we should be listening to the only climate economist who got the Nobel Prize in economics, not just whoever shouts the loudest.
Bjørn Lomborg, president of the Copenhagen Consensus, visiting fellow at Hoover Institution. Check out his book, False Alarm, How Climate Change Panic Costs Us Trillions, Hurts the Poor, and Fails to Fix the Planet. Bjørn, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Great to talk to you, Ben.
Alrighty, coming up, we're going to be joined by Douglas Carswell, President and CEO of the Mississippi Center for Public Policy, previously a member of British Parliament and co-founded Vote Leave. That was the official campaign that won the Brexit referendum. He has some ideas on America and whether we are worth saving. At this point, we'll get to that in a moment. First, big tech companies, I don't trust them. You shouldn't trust them either. They don't like your political point of view, but they're using your data in order to make money. Now is the time to take a stand. Protect your personal data from big tech with the VPN I trust. For my online protection, ExpressVPN. You see, every device, whether you're on your phone, laptop, or TV, has a unique string of numbers called an IP address. When you search for stuff, watch videos, even click a link, big tech companies can use that IP to track all your activity and tie it back to you. When I use ExpressVPN, my connection gets rerouted through their secure encrypted servers, so these companies can't see my IP address at all. My internet activity becomes anonymized. My network data is encrypted. The best part? You don't need to be tech savvy at all to use ExpressVPN. Just download the app on your phone or computer, tap one button. Now you are protected. Protect your internet activity with the VPN I use every single day. Visit expressvpn.com/Ben. Get 3 extra months free on a 1-year package. That's expressvpn.com/Ben. Get 3 extra months for free. That's expressvpn.com/Ben. Again, don't trust big tech to protect you. Instead, protect yourself from big tech. expressvpn.com/Ben to get 3 extra months for free. Already coming up, Douglas Carswell joins the show. This is The Ben Shapiro Show. Welcome back. This is The Ben Shapiro Show. Joining us on the line is Douglas Carswell, President and CEO of the Mississippi Center for Public Policy, previously a member of British Parliament for 12 years, and co-founded Vote Leave, the official campaign that won the Brexit referendum. He's the author of several books. He tweets at Douglas Carswell. Douglas, thanks so much for joining the show. Really appreciate it.
And it's wonderful to be here. Thank you.
So first of all, welcome to our shores. And I got to say, it feels like you're arriving at a rather inauspicious time in American history. While the economy seems to be finally recovering as COVID lets up, that is not stopping the current government from blowing out spending to an unprecedented extent and radically reshifting the thinking of how government and the individual ought to interact. As somebody who's just arrived, what do you make of it?
Well, it's wonderful to be here, but I think you're right. America is at a critical juncture. Either America retains American exceptionalism, which is the thing that since its founding has made America unlike any other country and made America the most successful republic to have ever existed, or if the radical left get their way in DC, they reduce America to being just another overtaxed, overregulated country. And America becomes a sort of a North American version of France, or heaven help us, a North American version of Belgium. And if that happens, it's not just going to be a catastrophe for hundreds of millions of Americans. I think it will be a disaster for humankind. The United States has been the world's #1 power for 120 years. And it's been, by and large, an extraordinary 120 years, the best 120 years of human existence. Human progress has been achieved, I would argue, by American hegemony. And if America becomes just another country, the lights go out, not just in America, the lights will go out in the world.
So one of the things that you mentioned there, you compared the United States to France and Belgium, and it is true that those economies are not capable of driving a global economy, obviously, while the United States' global economy, running of the global economy really has. There's another element here, which is that even France is starting to reject some of the crazy theories that have become mainstream in the United States. You've started to see French politicians say they don't want any of the woke identity politics stuff the United States is pushing infused into European life. It's amazing how the left in the United States that so admires the Europeans is perfectly willing to cram down an even more radical version of identity politics that the Europeans reject.
It's true. If you're doing something that even French intellectuals say is extreme and way off, you, I think, need to stop and think what it is you're doing. Look, the essence of modernity, the essence of civilization is that we judge people not on the basis of immutable characteristics. Pre-modern societies always did that. In pre-modern societies, anywhere around the world, in pre-modern times, you were judged on the basis of immutable characteristics. The rank you were born to in society, your race, your ethnicity, your gender, and so on and so forth. One of the transformative things about the Enlightenment on both sides of the Atlantic is this idea that you judge people not on the basis of immutable characteristics, but as Martin Luther King so beautifully put it, on the content of someone's character. What the radical left in America is doing in the name of progressivism is something deeply regressive. They're actually going back to a pre-modern notion that you should judge people on the basis of immutable characteristics. It's not just profoundly un-American, it's pre-modern and, frankly, anti-civilization. And if even France gets this, boy, people in some of those liberal arts colleges need to wake up and recognize what they're doing. It is not progressive, it is regressive.
We're speaking with Douglas Carswell. He's president and CEO of the Mississippi Center for Public Policy. So, Douglas, do you think there's a prospect for American recovery? Sometimes it's easier for people who are coming from the outside to see this than people on the inside. Here, it seems like we may be in sort of an inevitable slow slide into European-style progressivism, but again, without the subsidy of America to hold that up. Europe had the privilege of having the United States basically hold up the world economy and much of their defense budget for half a century. Nobody's going to be holding up the foundations here if the United States goes. Do you think that there's a prospect for American recovery in the offing here?
Absolutely. No one ever prospered by betting against the United States. And I think the United States can recover. But it's going to take a conscious effort by listen to your show, Ben. People like you and people like me and right-thinking people across America to recover. Look, things must have seemed pretty grim in the 1970s. In the 1970s, people said that America faced inevitable decline. They said that Japan was going to eclipse the United States. They said that America would inevitably fail against the Soviet threat. Think how big a challenge it must have seemed to Reagan and his generation. They overcame that and they revived and recovered the United States fortunes because of this self-belief, this self-confidence. We need to rediscover this, and we can rediscover this. This intersectionist dogma is sapping America's confidence. In the 3 months I've been here, I've been so struck at how awful this intersectionalist radical woke agenda has been at sapping America's confidence. Incidentally, the bad guys in Peking, Beijing, and Moscow love this idea of American weakness. It is dividing America. America is a country that, if America was built on hatred and racism, why is it that people from every color, every creed, and every culture and country want to come here? It's profoundly damaging to America if we allow this intersectionist agenda any further traction. But we can recover. The United States, I think, will recover, but it will only recover if it rediscovers its self-confidence and faces down this absurd and nonsensical and pre-modern creed that pits Americans against Americans.
I'm Douglas Carswell, president and CEO of the Mississippi Center for Public Policy. You can follow all of his work at Douglas Carswell on Twitter. Douglas, really appreciate the time. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me, Ben. It's wonderful.
All righty, folks. Well, we have reached the end of this week's broadcast, but fear not, we'll be back next week. Now, I have Passover. That means that I won't be back here on Monday. I will be back here on Tuesday. So you have a long weekend not to ruin things. And a quick reminder on Passover. Passover, of course, the holiday in which the exodus from Egypt took place. When we speak about freedom in the American context, or in any context, really, the freedom of Exodus provides the sort of backbone for that. The freedom of Exodus was not about just the Jews being released from service to Pharaoh, and slavery to Pharaoh. It was about leaving so that the Jews could serve God in the wilderness. That is the actual quote from the Bible. That is the end of that particular verse. People tend to forget that. Freedom is not just about freedom from, it's about freedom to. And the freedom to is to perform in virtuous fashion on behalf of members of your family, members of your community, to build social structures that are strong enough that we don't need a government to cram down its own peculiar version of virtue or decency on any of us, because we know decency and virtue from our own communities. This is The Ben Shapiro Show.